Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about the ego map for Enneagram Type 5. We're going to explore their money monsters and their path to money mastery. And all of this content comes from my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And it releases July 8th, 2025, and pre-orders are available on Amazon. So if you if you like this content, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And if you need help figuring out your Enneagram type, you can follow this QR code to the IVQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test, which is the best one out there in my opinion. And also, if you need any further resources or want some individual coaching or are looking for a keynote speaker, you can go to my website at douglynam.com. All right, let's jump into it. So, Type 5, you have a sacred wound of what I call internalized fear. So what does that mean? Well, here's the deal. When you were born, you have this psychological umbilical cord that attaches to your caregivers. So that means you develop this egoic codependence on your caregivers, so that allows them to do most of the driving for you of reality. And you need this bond. Without it, you wouldn't be able to survive. However, over childhood, from say 0 to 10 years of old, this psychological umbilical cord has to get cut, as we've described in other videos on the shadow structure, and it can only be cut with one of 3 sharp negative emotional knives, and that's anger, sadness, or fear. Because anger, sadness, and fear are the 3 primary negative emotions in the mammalian brain. It's in the mid-limbic region of the brain down in here. It's the oldest and deepest part of your whole brain structure. And you got cut with fear because and it had to be one of those 3 emotions. It has to be a negative emotion, and since all negative emotions are riding on top of those 3, it's some admixture of fear that cut that psychological umbilical cord and allowed you to differentiate or individuate from your caregivers. And the reason it's negative is because positive emotions would just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. So without this sacred wound, you wouldn't be able to develop an ego, you wouldn't have a consciousness to drive around in, and that would be pretty bad. So although this shadow structure that comes out of this sacred wound feels a bit negative at first, it's necessary to move from that state of unconscious unity that you have in the womb up to conscious separation that you have at full maturity or maturation in adulthood. So you have a sense of what's me and what's not me. All right. So this internalized fear that you had, what happened in your childhood is you probably had maybe intrusive or overly protective or domineering caregivers, loving and kind though they may be and well-meaning though they may be. You somehow felt like your external environment wasn't really a safe place for you, so you tended to retreat into your mind. You kind of built this mind palace where you live in your own head and try to keep the rest of the external world at bay. And your greatest fear from this sacred wound then becomes being helpless or incompetent. You just didn't feel like you had the skills to navigate the chaos or the confusion or the pain or the frustration that you felt in your childhood environment. So you internalize that pain, and that creates that fear of being incapable or incompetent. So you're always trying to then master the reality around you, and then you'll act. But the problem with that is we call you the investigator, or I call you the compact car of ego consciousness. And the reason is you're always observing or investigating the world around you. You're analyzing this infinite amount of data coming at you at any moment, and then you're trying to process it all in your head, and you think, well, once I've got it all figured out and mastered, then I'll act, then I'll speak, and then I'll say my piece or do my thing. But the problem is that you can get stuck up there because there's always an infinite amount of data coming at you, and the analysis is sort of never finished. And so the reason we call you the compact car is because then all this data analysis, all this stuff the universe feels very intrusive, like it's coming at you all the time. And so you have a very limited gas tank for social interaction, which is why I give you that funny nickname of compact car, but also because you can fit into tight mental spaces where other people fear to tread. Like you are the true brainiacs of the Enneagram and have this really intellectual powerhouse in many ways. And this is one of your gifts to bring to the world, which I'm going to to help teach you how to do more effectively. All right, but this greatest fear then creates your greatest vice, which is going to be avarice. And avarice is that pulling in of information, of ideas, of resources, of money, of whatever it is that's going to help you feel capable and competent and secure. But it kind of never ends. It's always coming at you. So you're always taking more in than you're letting out. And so that then leads to your primary ego addiction, which is stinginess. It's that you on the balance sheet of life, you're probably taking in 90% and letting out 10%, which is where the rest of us are probably a little more 50-50. We're a little more freer with our emotions, with our feelings, with our ideas, with our self-expression, which can be very hard and challenging for a type 5. So that stinginess is what can get you into all kinds of trouble. And again, I've changed much of the terminology in the traditional Enneagram. I've left the original terms in parentheses here on this chart so you can follow along if you know them. If you don't worry about it. I think this new terminology is a little more efficient, but take your pick. All right, so then this leads to your primary ego addiction of stinginess. Again, it's that taking in and not letting a lot out. But the problem is that when you overdose on stinginess, when you're too reserved, you're too compact, you've stuffed maybe too much into the compact car, and not that you're overflowing, you need a psychological release valve. And for you, that's your secondary ego addiction to planning, which is the primary ego addiction for a type 7. So you start to look a little bit more like a type 7, the enthusiast who's always excited about what's next or the next adventure. So planning is an inelegant way of saying you're kind of, oh boy, what's next? And what kind of adventure can I have in the near future that will allow me to sort of let off some of this steam and maybe let some of the luggage out of the compact car and make some more room. But the problem is it isn't just planning by itself. So you're not becoming a type 7. It's still wedded to your greatest vice of avarice. So it's avarice wanting more and wanting to let some things out. Excuse me. And that creates your ego stress response. So when you're stressed, you tend to release in some sort of indulgence. And that indulgence could be through food, through binge eating. It could be through sex. It could be alcohol or substances, partying. You kind of look maybe a little bit like the prodigal son, if you know that story from the Old Testament. Or you can be indulging in your darker fantasies in your head. You can play out all kinds of wild fantasies in your head. You can indulge in those to excess sometimes. And also fives, you're so curious about the world and you're so interested in analyzing and observing it that if someone tells you there's something you can't look at, that something is taboo or forbidden or off limits, it tends to spark your curiosity. So oftentimes, fives can have a somewhat hidden or not so hidden obsession with the macabre or the darker aspects of life or the things that the rest of us don't really want to look at. Or it can also be looking at the really difficult things, the big ideas, the physics, the metaphysics that others of us don't want to look at either. So it's a superpower, but it can also be a bit of a weakness. Like anything in any of our personalities, every strength has its corresponding weakness. So these are your strengths, but they also are things you need to focus on mitigating the downside of these traits. All right. So when you overindulge, you can it's a maladaptive response to let off some of that, to undo some of that stinginess, at least temporarily, until your ego can kind of get its nervous system back to baseline and get back on the road again. So you're sort of borrowing an SUV from type 7s for a little bit when you've sort of maybe crashed the compact car or it isn't functioning very effectively. Because with every Enneagram type, our primary ego addiction tends to create, it's designed to protect us from our greatest fear, but over time it actually creates the very fear that we were trying to avoid. And when that happens, that's when you switch over to your secondary ego addiction to try to undo some of that damage and kind of get back on track a little bit. So that's moving us up through the first half of life, establishing your independence and your independent sense of self. But then these ego addictions, when we overuse them, or we have to use them, right, to mature. But over time, our ego starts to grow and grow and grow. It doesn't know when to stop, and it only will stop when it hits some boundary of reality. And that boundary is going to hurt. It's going to create suffering for ourselves. It's a self-created suffering. There might be an external tragedy or trauma that it could be a triggering event, but it's then our response to it. It's the overuse of your stinginess and overuse of your planning and the stress response to indulgence that can then get you into all kinds of trouble and create multi-car pileups and fender benders for yourself. But what we need to do when we hit that dark night of the soul, where we feel so disparate and separate from everyone and everything else, including our sense of the sacred and the divine, whatever words or phrases you want to use with your ape face to describe the holy and the sacred, go for it. It doesn't really matter in the system. It pairs well with any spiritual practice. But eventually, when you hit that dark night of the soul, what you're tempted to do is try to get back down out of it and even use your ego addictions more, where what you need to do is to break open, let your ego soften, gain more compassion, gain more wisdom, gain more maturity, and all these things, so that you are not so unconsciously reacting through your shadow structure, but consciously acting out your enlightenment structure, which we're going to get into here in a minute. But let's talk about your money monsters. So there's two core unhealthy ways we can relate to money, and that's going to be avoidant of money, meaning we don't like dealing with it. We push it away because of the fear and the anxiety it produces. Or we're overly anxious about it and care too much about it and are obsessing about money all the time. And we can also be jumbled. We can be anxious in one area of our financial life and avoidant in another through what I call the 4 pillars of finance. So the 4 pillars of finance are going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So you need to master all 4 of those pillars, and my book will detail and give you much more detail on how to do all of this, but this is just a quick overview. But when you're money avoidant, so you could be avoidant in one of those pillars and anxious in another. That's also something to think about. All right, but if you're a money avoidant type 5, I call you the moot. Now, moot means you think money is just irrelevant. So a moot 5 is likely to be stuck living in their head all the time and think the material world is sort of moot, irrelevant, doesn't matter. I don't care about money. You're going to live a very aesthetic or very Spartan life, maybe be living very much like a stoic in some ways. But this can cause all kinds of problems for you financially when you don't take your financial life seriously, because you're not going to have the resources necessarily that you need to take care of yourself, to take care of the people you love, or to really love and serve the world in the most powerful and effective way that you possibly can, because money is really your great superpower and your utility belt of life to get stuff done. And so the more of it you have and the more you're using it in love and service for others, the more positive effect you're going to have in the world. So you want to try to avoid this sort of moot mindset and really focus on how are you avoiding earning, saving, investing, or giving. And for 5s, giving tends to be something they have a harder time with. Saving, maybe not so much, but the investing could be an issue. But then let's jump over to the miser. So the miser is the money anxious type 5, and they're sort of like Ebenezer Scrooge in human form. They're so concerned about money. They're so stingy. They're so filled with avarice and greed that they're focusing on their finances to the point where it's causing pain and suffering for themselves and for those they care and love and the world around them. And so there might be really penny pinching to the point of just absurdity, right? And that stinginess is gone amok in their financial life. And that would be the essence of a miser. Okay, so you've got these 2 different money monsters. You might might mix and match them in different contexts or even the time of day or whatever the stress you're undergoing in your life. Now, this will, in time, usually you'll hit the midlife crisis, or there'll be some tragedy that'll hit, throws you into that dark night of the soul. We're going to move into your enlightenment structure, but there's a trap door that every type has, what I call your faux virtue, your fake virtue. So this is a virtue for other Enneagram types, but maybe not a virtue for you, and that's going to be gratitude. Now, gratitude is great. I'm not saying you should do gratitude journals. All of these things are wonderful. But what can happen is gratitude for 5 can be used as an excuse to justify their avarice and their stinginess. They can be so grateful for everything except the concept of sharing. And so they don't tend to let out. They don't let their emotions out. They're not letting their feelings out. They're not expressing themselves. And so the gratitude is like, well, I'm grateful for what I have, and I'm not letting any of it go. All right, so the way out of their shadow structure and the thing that they really want to focus on to really become a money master is going to be generosity. And that's going to not just generosity of money, but generosity of time, generosity with their emotions, with their feelings, with their ideas. Like you've got all this great stuff, this knowledge you've accumulated, all these cool things you've figured out in your attempt to feel capable and competent. But if you were able to share that with the world, that would be one of the greatest gifts you can give to others. So you need to learn to have generosity of spirit in everything that you do, including in how you relate to your finances. But then we have a secondary recovery virtue that you also need to practice that opens up once you start practicing more generosity, and that's going to be mercy. Now, mercy is the primary recovery virtue for a type 8 or the Hummer. So when you're practicing mercy, you start to look and act a little bit more like a type 8. You become more assertive. You become more forthright. You're able to share your thoughts and ideas and opinions more freely without fear of judgment or fear of looking helpless or feeling incompetent. So when you can bring that mercy towards yourself, be a little more compassionate towards yourself and not so fearful about how you look, whether people are going to judge you as capable and competent, but also you're more generous with all of your great internal resources and all your material resources. You start to embody your greatest virtue or your highest virtue, which is then going to be non-attachment, meaning you're not attached to all this stuff in your head and you can let it out without feeling depleted. So when people are asking you to share your emotions, your feelings, and even your resources, it feels like you're being drained all the time. And so that's why you need a lot of alone time to go back and recharge, which you're always going to need that alone time, and it's not bad and it's not wrong. But when you can practice non-attachment, then you're not going to be drained every time you need to engage in a deep, lengthy social interaction, emotional conversation, or need to be able to, let some of your precious hoard of cash that you're sitting on out a little bit in order to help others. So being merciful and generous gives you non-attachment, which is the ultimate cure for the avarice, which is your greatest vice. And then when you do that, that fulfills your greatest hope, which is to know that you are wholly capable and competent. Now, part of I go into this in much more detail in the book, but part of it is seeing yourself as a fractal piece of the divine, is connecting with your inner soul, that eternal spark inside you that's always there, always will be there, and that's sort of free from all the vicissitudes of life. But when you tap into that inner spirit, if you will, then and you start to have you're not attached to all the things in your head, then people actually get to see your capability. They see your competence. You get to act more forthrightly and decisively in the world, and you'll really know just how capable and competent that you are, because you're actually getting stuff done rather than just analyzing it all in your head. So that's the thing, is that your greatest hope then cures. It's the opposite of your greatest fear. So you're not living in your greatest fear all the time, and that begins to heal that sacred wound that we started with, and lets you really then move into your sacred gift, or this is your divine community service that fives were put on this planet to fulfill, which is divine truth. You bring the real truth and beauty and wonder and mystery of the universe back to others. You're able to, you've now been observing and analyzing and investigating, and you've now, hopefully over the decades of your life, you've figured some stuff out, and now you can share that with a kind of with generosity and mercy and non-attachment. And that divine truth is the thing that the world most desperately needs. That's the thing that you were put here to share in whatever field of expertise is your chosen field. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's math, like in science, like Albert Einstein was a classic type 5, brought us the divine truth of physics and special relativity and general relativity. It could be through people like Warren Buffett, right, who then amass these great fortunes, teach us how to invest, the truth of investing. They can bring that into the world. Whatever that is for you, if you bring that out into the world in love and service, it's really your sacred or divine, your sacred gift to bring to others. And then when you do that, you become the money master, or what I call the Midas. Now, in the original Midas story, it's a little bit pejorative or negative, but I'm using it in the positive sense here. Everything you touch turns to gold because you are so capable, you are so knowledgeable, you have figured so much stuff out that literally the world, everything you touch turns to gold, including your financial life in those 4 pillars of finance of earning, saving, investing, and giving. You're no longer a money avoidant in any of those areas. You're no longer money anxious in any of those areas because you're practicing non-attachment. And then your financial life and your financial house is robust. You've really got your ducks in a row. And you're also able then to deploy all this great resources that you've amassed in love and service to a suffering world through whatever charities, whatever causes, whatever things are that really make your soul sing. And that's where you become the money master, because you're now living in conscious unity with everyone and everything everywhere. And you've moved from me, all about me, to we. You're not just thinking about me and mine, but us and ours, and how you are then loving and serving the world around you. Okay, so that's a quick overview. Again, want more information on all this, check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster. And if you want to ask me to come speak at any event, I do great keynotes. You can go to douglynam.com for that. Or if you want individual coaching sessions, you can find a link there as well. And again, if you like these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. That means the world to me. Thanks, gang. Talk next time.